Hey everyone, welcome back. So you guys really wanted us to break down this Conor McGregor case, huh? Well, buckle up, because today we're going deep on this one.
Yeah, it's definitely been making headlines, hasn't it?
That's for sure. We've got some news articles here to help us dissect everything. This isn't just about a famous athlete. This is about conflicting stories and what it really means to try to find justice, even when things are messy.
Right, exactly. It's a case that really grabs your attention right away because of, well, who's involved, right? I mean, you have Conor McGregor, this huge name in MMA, and then on the other side, you have Nikita Hand.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people probably didn't know much about her before all of this.
Right, exactly. Thrust into the spotlight because of these serious accusations she's making.
And it's pretty heavy stuff we're talking about here. I mean, going back to 2018 at a hotel in Dublin, Mrs. Hands saying that McGregor pinned her down, choked her,
Mhm.
and, well, she's using the words brutally raped and battered.
Wow.
Yeah, and she even had evidence of injuries too, bruises, scratches, things like that.
And then, of course, you have McGregor's side of things.
Right, completely different story.
Yeah, he's saying the whole encounter was totally consensual and that he did nothing wrong.
And his legal team is really pushing the jury to stick to the hard evidence, not just McGregor's personality.
Which is really interesting, right? They even said that, look, people are going to have their own opinions about McGregor, but we need to focus on the facts. Let those speak for themselves.
And that brings up the whole issue of, well, what eye is the evidence in this case?
Right.
I mean, there's this CCTV footage. It shows Mrs. Hands at the hotel and then leaving with McGregor and another guy, James Lawrence.
Which, makes it even more complicated, right?
Right, because she's actually accusing Lawrence of assault, too.
Yeah. And to make things even more tangled, she lost that part of the case.
She won the case against McGregor.
Yes, the jury sided with her there, and she was awarded over 248,000 euros in damages.
Wow. So, I mean, just to back up for a second, you've got Mrs. Hand saying one thing, you've got McGregor saying another thing. There's video footage, there are injuries, there's a second guy involved. Where do we even begin to sort through all of this?
Right, that's $1 million question, isn't it? I think for starters, you have to remember that these types of assault cases are just so difficult to prove. It often comes down to one person's word against another.
Especially when you don't have a lot of physical evidence to go on.
Exactly. And then you add in the whole layer of public perception.
Right, because with someone as famous as McGregor,
It's almost impossible to separate the man from the accusations, right?
yeah,
It all gets jumbled together.
and you touched on this earlier, McGregor's lawyers are actually claiming extortion.
They are.
I mean, what does that even mean in this context? What evidence are they using to back that up?
Well, unfortunately, the source material we have here doesn't go into detail about the specific evidence they presented in court. But generally, if you're going with an extortion defense, you're trying to show that there's a pattern of behavior, maybe even specific communication that suggests someone's trying to use the accusations to get money.
Hmm, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a pretty risky legal move.
So you have to wonder how the jury weighed that against everything else.
Exactly. And I think it's so important to remember, too, that this is a civil case, not a criminal one. There's a big difference there.
Yeah, for sure. I think some people might not be clear on that.
So in a criminal case, the burden of proof is much higher, right? You have to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. But with a civil case, it's more about proving that something is more likely to be true than not. It's called a preponderance of the evidence.
I see. And that obviously affects the whole way the case is argued and how the evidence is presented.
Absolutely.
And speaking of evidence, what about Mrs. Hand's statement after the verdict? I mean, from what I've read, it was pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah, it was emotional, for sure. She talked about the toll this whole thing has taken on her life, her daughter's life, and then there was that part where she addressed other survivors of assault. Telling them to speak up, telling them they have a voice, and that they have to keep fighting for justice.
Wow. I bet that resonated with a lot of people.
I think so.
It just makes you think about how hard it must be to come forward, especially when you're accusing someone as wealthy and famous as McGregor.
Oh, absolutely. That power imbalance is so huge. It's probably a big part of why so many survivors stay silent. They're afraid.
And you have to wonder, right, if this would have played out the same way if it was just an average Joe being accused, not Conor McGregor.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So let's try to sum this all up, right? You have a woman accusing a superstar athlete of assault. The jury ends up believing her, even though there's conflicting evidence. And then she gets a pretty hefty financial award. There's just so much to think about here.
You said it. It really just highlights how complicated these situations can be. And it raises questions about the whole legal system, right? Like, how do we balance these different accounts? How much weight should we give to public opinion? And most importantly, how do we create a system where survivors feel safe and supported enough to come forward?
Yeah. Those are some really heavy questions, ones we probably won't have the answers to today.
That's for sure.
But we want to hear from you. If you were on that jury, how would you have weighed all those different pieces of the puzzle? And what do you think this whole case says about how we talk about consent and justice?
It definitely leaves us with a lot to think about.
That's all the time we have for this deep dive. But make sure to share your thoughts in the comments. We'll catch you guys next time.
See you then.